Welcome to Unit 1, Module 1. Before we get started, I'd just like to say that this video is meant to be a brief overview of what you'll be studying in this module. Don't worry about trying to remember everything. You'll see all this again in much more detail as you go through the readings. I just want to go over the key concepts in this module so that they'll look familiar to you when they come up later. Also, if you feel like you need a recap of this module later on, you can come back and re-watch this video to give you a quick refresher. In this unit, we're going to be going over economics. Economics is the study of production, consumption, and transfer of wealth. Basically, it tries to understand how goods and services get created and distributed, and who winds up buying them. Now, economics is a huge subject, and we'll barely be scratching the surface here, but since businesses operate within this sphere, it's important to have a sense of some of the basics. Before you can sell a product, you first must create it. Goods are created from resources, and those include land and natural resources, such as water, minerals, timber, etc. Labor, which is your workforce. Capital, which includes money and company assets like manufacturing equipment. And entrepreneurship, which is the driving force that brings the vision, plan, and execution all together. Once you have your product, you're ready to put it in the market. There are two major types of economic systems, planned and free market. The free market system, also known as capitalism, is built on the idea that consumer demands and business competition will naturally work out what gets produced and who will buy it. In a planned market system, though, what gets produced and who winds up with those products is determined by the government. An economic system doesn't have to be entirely one or the other. When elements of each of these systems is used, it's called a mixed market system. There are reasons that some industries function better in the free market than others, but for now, let's take a quick look at how the free market works. You've probably heard of supply and demand. It's at the heart of the free market system. In the simplest terms, it refers to the idea that the supply, the demand, and the price of a particular good are all related to one another. Essentially, if there is a high demand for something that is in short supply, its price will naturally be driven up. And likewise, if there is low demand for something that there's a lot of, the price will naturally fall. But it's not just supply and demand controlling the price. The price can also directly affect supply and demand. If there is a good selling for a particularly high price, for example, it makes producing that good more attractive and more businesses will start producing it. But again, if the price of the good is very low, some businesses may not be able to stay profitable and may either go out of business or find another product to produce. I said earlier that some industries function better in the free market than others, and that's because not all free market competition is the same. When we talk about free market and its natural ability to respond to changing conditions, we are usually imagining it all operating under perfect competition. Perfect competition means that there are many businesses competing and many interested customers purchasing in the marketplace. This type of competition does a good job of adjusting the supply, demand, and price like we talked about. On the opposite end of the spectrum, however, is what we call a monopoly. Just like the goal of the board game where you're trying to own all the properties, a monopoly means that there's only one seller in the marketplace. Because there is no competition to naturally regulate prices, this is generally good for the seller, but not so good for the consumers. The US government, then, will step in to regulate things or to make sure a monopoly isn't formed in the first place. These two forms of competition are the extremes, but there's a lot of room in between. Often, for example, companies produce similar but not identical goods. When every brand sells a differentiated version of a product, we call this monopolistic competition. The final form of competition is called an oligopoly. In this market, there are only a few large competitors. This is usually because it's hard or impossible for smaller competitors to get into the market. So how do we know if the economy is doing well or not? We assess the economy in a variety of ways. Some of the more popular methods include looking at GDP, or gross domestic product, which tells us the value of all goods and services produced. The higher the GDP, the more value that's being created, and in general, the better the economy is doing. We can also look at the unemployment rate. The lower the unemployment rate, the more people that are working and making money and contributing value to the economy. And finally, we can look at inflation. This is usually done by looking at the consumer price index, which can tell us how much our dollar is worth. A stable and predictable dollar value is best for the economy in general. Since the US is a free market economy, no one, including the government, has full control over it. But there are some tools that can influence things. These tools fit into two categories. The first is monetary policy. The Federal Reserve, or the Fed as it's called, controls how much money is in circulation and what the standard interest rates are. It can use these powers to manipulate inflation rates and encourage spending. Fiscal policy refers to the government's powers of taxing and spending, which can also be used to influence people's spending habits. These are the key points of the module, so keep an eye out for them as they'll come up again as you continue. Thanks for watching, and good luck with the rest of the module.
Created using Powtoon.